Monica thought winning the court case was her final battle, but no one expected that after this victory, her cafe would become the target of new, even more dangerous enemies. When hatred reaches a new level, she faces an impossible choice: give up and save her life, or stay and fight those willing to destroy her world at any cost. But what she did in response to these threats would redefine justice. How far will she go for the truth that may cost her everything? Monica sat in her cafe, nervously fidgeting with the edges of her notebook. Today was an important day, the day the court was set to deliver a verdict on her case. It had been a long legal battle with the city authorities, who had introduced laws that made it difficult for her business to survive, driven by pressure from local elites. Monica knew this wasn't just a legal dispute. It was much more. A case that impacted not only her cafe, but the rights of everyone who had faced injustice and discrimination. Her emotions were a mixture of fear and hope. Fear of possible failure, knowing that if the court ruled against her, it could destroy her cafe and everything she had built. But she also felt hope for justice, that her fight for equality would not be in vain. Anna, her faithful assistant, sat down next to her and placed a reassuring hand on Monica's shoulder. "You're worried," she said gently. Monica looked at her, sighed, and nodded. "No matter how much I try to convince myself otherwise, yes, I'm worried. This could change everything. If we lose, I don't know what's next." Anna squeezed her hand. "But you've already proven your strength. No matter how this goes, you'll always be the woman who showed this town that justice is possible." Those words calmed Monica slightly, but the anxiety still lingered. The day ahead could alter her life, and she needed to be ready for anything. Midway through the day, Monica's phone rang. It was her lawyer, Lisa. Monica instantly tensed, her heart pounding faster. She answered the call, her voice trembling. "Lisa, what did they decide?" There was a pause before Lisa spoke. "Monica, congratulations. We won." The words exploded in her mind. For a moment, she couldn't believe it was true. Her cafe, her fight, her efforts, they had all been justified. The laws aimed at shutting her down were declared invalid, and her rights were protected. The court had confirmed that her cafe had the right to operate without the unfair restrictions. Monica's eyes filled with tears. This was more than just a victory in a legal battle. It was a triumph over injustice, over those who had tried to take her dream away. She closed her eyes, trying to absorb the overwhelming emotions. "Lisa, this is incredible," she whispered, her voice shaking with joy and relief. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you." "You did this yourself, Monica," Lisa replied warmly. "We were here to help, but this was your fight." After hanging up the phone, Monica sat in silence for a while, reflecting on everything that had happened. Her heart filled with joy, but along with it came the realization this victory was just the beginning. This fight had given her strength and confidence, but she knew there was still much more to be done. That evening, Monica's cafe was filled with people. Her team, allies, friends, and even some customers gathered to celebrate the victory. Laughter and conversation filled the room, and for the first time in a long while, Monica felt like she could truly relax. She sat at a table, watching as the cafe, once under siege, had now become a place of celebration. Her heart swelled with gratitude for everyone who had supported her along the way. Activists, friends, customers, they had all helped her overcome the challenges. She knew this victory wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who believed in justice. "You did it, Monica," Anna said, approaching her with a glass of wine. "I'm so proud of you, we all are." Monica smiled and took the glass. "Thank you, Anna. But this victory is ours. I couldn't have done it without you all." They raised their glasses, and Monica felt a renewed sense of determination filling her. This evening was not only a celebration of victory, but the start of a new chapter. She knew there was still much work to be done, that her fight for equality was far from over. But now she was certain. Her efforts were making a difference, and justice was possible if one didn't give up. As the guests began to leave, Monica stood at the door of her cafe. She looked up at the starry sky and took a deep breath. Her cafe had become a true symbol of what could be achieved, even in the face of the toughest challenges. She no longer doubted her strength. Her journey continued, but now she knew she had the support and that her fight mattered, not only to her but to everyone seeking equality. That evening, after the last customer left, Monica sat alone at one of the cafe's tables. The silence enveloped her, and in that silence, she heard her disappointment. Her head was heavy, her heart weighed down like a stone. Part of her wanted to give up, to go back to the city where she was loved and supported, where she didn't have to face blatant hatred. But another part of her knew this fight was not just for herself, but for many other women and men who dreamed of equality. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Monica wasn't expecting anyone at this hour. When she opened the door, she saw a young woman holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I'm sorry it's so late," the girl said, slightly embarrassed. "I just wanted to say thank you for your cafe. It's so cozy here. I came with my friend this morning and we really liked it." Monica felt something shift inside her. One kind word of support could outweigh all the moments of despair. She smiled at the girl, feeling the weight in her chest lift. After the girl left, Monica sat back at the table. That evening became a turning point. Her strength seemed to have left her, but at that very moment when she stood on the verge of giving up, she felt a surge of confidence. This wasn't just a cafe. It was her voice in the fight against the racism that had plagued her since childhood. She could no longer allow anyone to make her feel unworthy. "I'm staying," she said firmly to herself, looking out at the empty street. "I'll make this cafe a success." Her eyes burned with determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but now she was ready. This wasn't just a cafe. It was her fight for a place in the world where she and others like her could feel equal. That morning, Monica sat at a small table by the window of her cafe, lost in thought. Outside, the town carried on with its usual rhythm. People walked the streets, children played on the sidewalks, and the sun warmly illuminated everything around. Yet inside her, tension grew. She was fully aware that her business was under intense scrutiny, not because of the quality of her food or service, but because of who she was. In recent days, the local authorities had begun to exert increasing pressure, additional inspections, stricter sanitation requirements that no other cafe had ever been asked to meet. Monica held a letter in her hands, yet another directive from the mayor's office listing new, more stringent conditions for her to continue running her business. The lines of text burned in her mind, igniting both anger and helplessness. A single question echoed in her heart. Why? Why were there different rules for her? Why didn't they want to see her here in this small town where everyone knew each other? She had tried to ignore the whispers behind her back, the sideways glances, and the openly hostile behavior of her neighbors. But with each passing day, these small things became more obvious, like shards piercing her confidence. Monica understood that beneath it all lay fear. Fear that she, a Black woman, had succeeded where others had grown used to seeing only their own. "They want me to give up," she whispered to herself, gazing out the window at the people passing by. Her thoughts swirled like the wind outside, finding no peace. Each new inspection became more senseless and absurd. Authorities picked apart every detail, from the arrangement of the furniture to minor ventilation issues that had never been questioned before. Monica knew this was just an excuse to force her to close. She slowly released the piece of paper and looked out onto the street. She felt isolated, as if she were standing at the center of an impenetrable circle of hostility. Yet, along with that, a new, stronger emotion began to stir within her: determination. "I won't back down," she told herself, feeling a fire ignite in her chest. The night was quiet, save for the occasional sound of cars passing by. Monica was getting ready to head home after a long day of work when she noticed something strange on the cafe's walls. As she approached, her heart clenched painfully. Racist graffiti, offensive messages, were scrawled across the clean brick walls, showing that someone clearly wanted to make it known she wasn't welcome. The glass windows had been shattered, shards glittering on the pavement like tiny drops left behind by a storm. She stood frozen, unable to move, fully taking in the scale of what had happened. Her cafe, her dream, had become a target of hatred. Monica felt pain in every fiber of her being. She took a few steps toward the wall, gently running her hand over the rough words. Every phrase, sprayed in bright paint, screamed at her that she didn't belong. "This is what they've come to," she whispered to herself, barely holding back tears. Inside her, everything was boiling: anger, pain, and bitterness. Her first instinct was to call the police. "They need to see this," she thought, quickly dialing the number. Images of justice flashed through her mind. The police arriving, documenting the crime, starting an investigation, and catching the perpetrators. But with each ring on the other end of the line, her confidence faded. The wait seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, the operator's voice on the other end sounded indifferent and dry. The dispatcher asked her a few standard questions, and she received a short response: "We'll send someone when we can." When Monica hung up, the weight in her heart grew heavier. She knew her expectations wouldn't be met, that her case wouldn't be a priority. In this town, her problem didn't seem important. "It's just a minor issue to them," she muttered, feeling an unbearable bitterness rising within her. Monica sat down on the cafe's doorstep and closed her eyes, trying to collect her thoughts. She realized she would have to fight alone, without the support of the system that was supposed to protect her rights. The police arrived several hours later. Two young men in uniform stepped out of the car, casually approached the broken windows, and looked at the graffiti on the walls. Their faces showed nothing but indifference. Monica stood nearby, feeling a knot tighten inside her. She wanted to hear words of support, to be reassured that they would take action, that justice would prevail. But instead, one of the officers, shrugging, mumbled, "It's just kids messing around. Probably nothing serious." Those words were the last straw for Monica. She looked at the officer, and inside, everything churned with rage and helplessness. "Just kids?" she wanted to scream. "This isn't just a game, it's an attack on my dignity, on my life." But instead, she replied in a restrained voice, "Aren't you going to do anything? This is clearly vandalism, with a racist motive." The officer shrugged again, indifferent. "We'll file a report, ma'am, but don't expect this case to be picked up right away. We've got bigger problems." When they left, leaving behind only empty promises and disappointment, Monica was left alone. Her cafe was ruined, her faith in the system shattered. She realized that no one was going to help her, and that the only way forward was to seek support outside of this broken system. That night, sitting in her vandalized cafe, she made a decision. She wouldn't give up. If the police weren't willing to fight for justice, she would find a way to do it herself. She would contact civil rights organizations, hire a lawyer, and draw media attention to her case. She would do everything in her power to show that she couldn't be broken. "They think this will stop me," she said to herself, feeling her resolve growing stronger. "I'm just getting started." In that moment, Monica realized that the fight would be long and hard, but she no longer felt weak. She felt the strength rising from her grief and anger. Tomorrow would bring a new day, and she would be ready for it. Monica sat behind the counter of her cafe, still recovering from the vandalism that had occurred. The walls had been repainted, the windows replaced, but the deep wounds left on her heart remained. In every glance from passers-by, she saw concealed hatred in the rare visits from customers, disapproval. Despite her efforts to forget, she couldn't shake the feeling that their disdain wasn't just personal, but a reflection of a town that had made her a symbol of everything foreign to its way of life. A strange sense of isolation had taken root inside her. It wasn't just the physical isolation in this conservative town, where she felt like an outsider, but emotional loneliness. Monica had thought more than once that perhaps all this struggle wasn't worth the pain it was causing her. They want me to leave. Thoughts like these persistently gnawed at her consciousness. But every time she felt like giving in, something deep inside reminded her that her fight was about more than just a cafe. She realized that handling everything alone was becoming increasingly difficult. Monica had never considered herself part of any community. She had always prided herself on her independence and ability to solve problems on her own. But now the situation called for a different approach. She understood that she needed to seek help, that she couldn't and shouldn't fight alone. Maybe it's time to find allies, she quietly said to herself, looking out at the empty street. Conversations with a few local activists she had met at various events surfaced in her mind. At the time, she hadn't paid much attention, but now she realized these people could be her support. They knew how to work in situations like this, how to organize protests and bring attention to injustice. Monica decided her next step would be to find these people. Monica met with Lisa at a small cafe where they had arranged to meet. Lisa was well known in activist circles as a lawyer specializing in discrimination and civil rights cases. Tall, with short black hair and a confident gaze, Lisa immediately struck Monica as someone unafraid of challenges. Monica nervously rubbed her hands under the table, unsure of where to start. She knew this meeting could change a lot, but she feared being disappointed again. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Monica said, trying to hide her nervousness. Lisa smiled. "No need to thank me, Monica. I've heard about your situation, and I think you're being incredibly brave. But you don't have to do this alone." Those words felt like a breath of fresh air to Monica. She wasn't used to hearing support, especially from someone who had seen her struggling to protect her business. Her expression softened slightly, and she began to tell Lisa about her cafe, the attacks, and the police who had ignored her pleas. Lisa listened attentively, occasionally nodding, but never interrupting. "This is all part of a larger system of oppression," Lisa finally said when Monica had finished her story. "They always do this. The problem is, if we don't make noise, no one will notice. We need to attract public attention." Monica frowned. "But how?" "I'm just one business owner in a small town. What can I possibly do?" Lisa smiled as if she'd heard that question 1,000 times. "You're not alone, Monica. There are many people who are ready to fight with you. We can organize a press conference, tell the story of what happened to your cafe. We'll bring in journalists, human rights organizations. The more people know about this, the more support you'll get." Monica thought about it. The idea was daunting, but at the same time, inspiring. She felt a new resolve building inside her. This wasn't just a fight for her cafe, it was a fight against a system that refused to recognize her rights. "Okay," Monica replied, her voice growing firmer. "I'm ready." The next day, a group of journalists and activists gathered at Monica's cafe. Lisa, with her professional confidence, had prepared everything: cameras, microphones, even banners with human rights slogans. Monica stood at the center of attention, feeling every movement noticed, every word recorded. Her hands trembled slightly, but she tried to remain composed. When the press conference began, Monica shared her story about how her cafe had been vandalized, how the police had ignored her pleas for help, about the hostility and discrimination she had faced from the beginning. Her voice shook, but she kept talking, knowing that this was important. "I'm not here to accuse anyone," Monica said, her voice growing stronger as she delved deeper into her story. "I'm here to show that no one should feel like a stranger in their own town, in their own country. I want this cafe to become a symbol that the fight for equality is possible and that everyone deserves respect." Lisa stood nearby, offering silent support with her gaze. She knew how important it was for Monica to speak out publicly, and she understood that this could change a lot. After Monica's speech, the journalists began asking questions, and Monica answered them with a newfound firmness that had been missing earlier. When the press conference ended, Lisa approached Monica and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did great," she said with a smile. "Now people will hear your story. And you'll see. You're not alone." Monica felt the bitterness and disappointment that had weighed on her for so long begin to fade. She was surrounded by people ready to support her, and that gave her new strength. She understood that her fight was just beginning, but now she had allies, and that changed everything. Monica woke up the morning after the press conference with a heavy heart. She hadn't expected her statement to attract so much attention. On the one hand, she felt proud for finally speaking up, not wavering in front of the cameras and tough journalist questions. But on the other hand, this attention brought new challenges. Many people weren't ready to support her. Anti-discrimination movements in the town were gaining strength, and this was causing concern for those who wanted to maintain the status quo. Monica tried to prepare for the new day, but thoughts of hatred and discrimination kept swirling in her mind. She recalled the comments left under the articles about her speech. Each line dripped with cold malice. "Go back to where you came from. Nobody here wants to see you." The words cut like knives. She had always known her fight wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't been prepared for such a wave of hatred from the people she had to live alongside. She sat at a table in her cafe holding her phone and read through a few messages that had come to her email. One of them contained a threat. "We won't let people like you ruin our town." She clenched her teeth, feeling her heart race with anxiety. Her mind was torn between fear and determination. She knew that to back down now would mean not only losing her personal battle, but also disappointing those who had begun to believe in her. "I won't give up," she whispered to herself, though her voice trembled. Before she could finish the thought, her phone rang. It was an invitation from a local television station for an interview. The hosts wanted to discuss her story, the movement against discrimination, and how her cafe had become a symbol of that struggle. This was an opportunity to draw even more attention to the issue, but Monica couldn't shake the thought that it would also bring another wave of criticism. She looked at the window of her cafe, where the fresh signs of repair from the vandalism were still visible. Could she endure another onslaught? The TV interview went smoothly enough, but the aftermath was immediate. A torrent of criticism and hatred hit Monica almost instantly. Threatening and hateful messages began pouring in even as the broadcast aired. Her phone didn't stop buzzing, and her social media accounts were flooded with negative comments. It seemed like every townsperson felt it was their duty to express that Monica was wrong and didn't belong there. "Did you really think this would change anything?" one resident posted on social media. "We won't let you ruin our way of life." Monica sat at her cafe table, scrolling through the comments and messages, feeling her heart sink deeper into despair. Each new threat compressed her inner world, like a spring coiled tight. Her fear was mingling with rage, and she didn't know what to do next. By the end of the day, Monica realized she needed to take a break. She put her phone away in a drawer and stood up, trying to clear her mind. Outside, the town went on as usual. People hurried about their business, entering and exiting shops, but for her, the world had become cold and distant. Suddenly, the cafe door swung open sharply, and a tall middle-aged man entered, his face full of obvious displeasure. He walked up to the counter and, without hiding his contempt, spoke. "Don't you see you're ruining our town? Why are you here? We live by our own rules, and you don't belong here." Monica froze for a moment, her heart racing wildly, but she knew she couldn't let fear win. Looking him straight in the eye, she calmly replied, "I live in this town just like you. I'm here because I have the right to be. And I'm not leaving." His face twisted with anger, but he didn't know how to respond. There were a few customers in the cafe, and they silently watched the scene unfold. After a brief pause, The man turned abruptly and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Monica felt something shift inside her. She had done it. She hadn't let him break her. The cafe fell silent for a moment, and then one of the customers approached the counter. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, offering a slight smile. "We need people like you who are willing to fight." Those words brought back Monica's confidence. She realized that her voice mattered, that her fight could inspire others. The next day, the cafe was busier than ever. People weren't just coming for coffee, they came to support Monica. Her response to the criticism and threats had spread through the town, and while some still considered her an outsider, more and more people began to see that her struggle was about something larger than just one woman's conflict with the town. One by one, people entered the cafe. Some simply bought a cup of coffee, others left words of encouragement. Each new visitor gave her the strength to keep going. Monica realized that, despite the hatred, there was another side. Those who supported her fight for justice. Later in the evening, as the flow of customers slowed down, a young couple approached Monica. "We just wanted to thank you," the woman said, smiling. "Your speech on TV was truly inspiring. We know how hard it is to face such hatred, but you've given us hope that we can fight back." Monica felt warmth spread through her chest. She had always believed her voice wasn't strong enough to make a difference. But now, she saw how her words and actions were resonating with people. "Thank you for your support," she replied with a sincere smile. "I've always believed that together we can do more." As the day came to an end, Monica sat behind the counter, watching her cafe, filled with warmth and life. She now knew that her voice wasn't alone. Her determination had led to people beginning to realize that change was possible if they didn't give up. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling a sense of inner peace. This fight was far from over, but she was no longer alone. Her voice was now being heard far beyond the walls of her cafe, and its power lay in the people who stood behind it. Monica stood by the window of her cafe, watching as the few passers-by hurried along. Their faces showed either fear or disdain, something that had become a normal part of her daily life. But it no longer stung as deeply as it once had. Inside her, resilience grew, strengthened daily by new challenges. She knew that her very presence in this town was an act of defiance. The cafe continued to operate despite boycotts, mockery, and even threats. In recent days, Monica had started hosting cultural events at her establishment: small music evenings, local art exhibitions, and poetry readings. She wanted her cafe to be more than just a place to eat. It was meant to be a sanctuary for people who cared about justice, equality, and understanding. She believed that art and culture could break the chains of prejudice and hatred. But within her, fear still lingered. Every day was a battle not only with external enemies, but also with her own doubts. She often wondered how much more she could endure before seeing real change. Yet, giving up wasn't in her nature. She had the support of lawyers and activists, connections she had built over time. She knew she had more tools now to keep fighting. "Monica, everything's ready for tonight's event." Anna, one of her assistants, interrupted her thoughts. Monica nodded, returning to the present. "Thank you, Anna. Let's get started." She believed that every event was not only an opportunity to showcase beauty and art, but also a way to attract new customers and open people's eyes to the issues she had faced. Despite the waves of negativity, she managed to keep the spirit of the cafe alive, and that gave her strength. Weeks passed since the start of these cultural events, and Monica's cafe began to attract more attention. Some town residents started attending the evenings, and slowly the hostility in their eyes began to fade. But with this new attention came fresh problems. The influence of disgruntled townspeople and business owners became more pronounced. The local authorities introduced new regulations that made running her business more difficult. Monica stood in her cafe, holding yet another official notice in her hands. She felt a cold wave of disappointment wash over her. More inspections, additional licenses, requirements for building improvements, and even minor infractions that seemed designed to make it impossible for her cafe to stay open. "They just want me to close," she said aloud, placing the notice on the counter. Anna, standing nearby, frowned. "This is absurd. They're creating problems out of thin air." Monica shook her head. "No, it's not out of thin air. It's their way of telling me I don't belong here. But I won't back down. This time I won't stay silent." She picked up the phone and dialed Lisa, her lawyer. "Lisa, hey, we need to talk. The city's introducing new laws that are threatening my cafe." Lisa was ready for such developments. She had seen situations like this before and knew how to respond. They arranged to meet the next day to discuss a plan of action. Monica realized that her battle was now entering a new phase. This would be a legal fight. By the next morning, Monica knew she wouldn't back down without a fight. Lisa arrived at the cafe with a stack of documents and legal strategies for protecting the business. They sat at a table, discussing their options, when Monica realized that this struggle had already surpassed her personal goals. "This is more than just a cafe," Lisa said, looking at Monica. "Your fight is a symbol of the changes that are starting to happen in this town." Those words struck Monica deeply. She had always thought of her business as a personal dream, but now she understood that her cafe had become something larger. It was a beacon for anyone who had faced discrimination and injustice. "We'll file a lawsuit against these new regulations," Lisa continued. "We have a good chance of winning. Public support is already on your side, and I'm confident the city authorities won't be able to ignore you anymore." Monica felt a new sense of hope fill her heart. Together, they began preparing for the legal battle. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but this time she had allies and support, which gave her the strength to keep going. Over the next few weeks, Monica and Lisa worked tirelessly on legal documents, attracting press and public attention. The cafe became a hub not only for cultural events, but also for active discussions on social justice. Monica had become the face of the movement, and her voice was now being heard far beyond the small town. One evening, after another successful event at the cafe, a visitor approached her quietly and said, "Thank you for not giving up. You're giving us all hope." Those words filled Monica with confidence. She was no longer just fighting for herself. Her struggle had become a fight for justice for everyone who had suffered from discrimination and unfairness. She knew there was still much to do, but now she understood that her voice could change the world. Monica sat at her cafe's table, staring at the open email on her laptop screen. The words blurred before her eyes, her focus entirely consumed by the last message she had received that morning. It was another anonymous threat. The email vividly detailed how her cafe would burn if she didn't leave town. Fear clenched her heart, but what unsettled her most was the deep hatred radiating from people she didn't even know. She had grown accustomed to the negativity from the townspeople, the boycotts, the hostile looks, but the threats, especially those endangering her life and business, were becoming increasingly serious. She read the email again, hoping to find any clue that could lead to the sender. But as before, the message was anonymous. It seemed to ooze cold malice, offering no escape. "I have to do something," she said aloud, feeling her confidence start to wane under the weight of the escalating threats. Fear for her life, her employees, and the guests of the cafe gnawed at the calm and resolve she had worked so hard to build. Monica closed her laptop and stood up. She walked to the window, looking out at the street. Everything outside seemed peaceful. People strolled by, cars passed, but she knew this calm hid a real threat. She needed to take action to protect herself and her business. "Cameras," she whispered, recalling a conversation with Lisa. "I need to install cameras." The idea had been haunting her for days. Monica understood the need for self-protection, but the thought of having to monitor her own cafe made her feel even more vulnerable. Yet there was no other choice. She could no longer rely on the police or anyone else's help. She had to become the defender of her own life. A week had passed since the cameras were installed. Monica had hoped they would ease her anxiety, but instead, the fear had only grown. Now she spent sleepless nights reviewing the footage, dreading that something might happen at any moment. Suspicious people began appearing more frequently outside her cafe, approaching the windows, glancing around, and walking away, as if testing her preparedness. Her strength was waning. Each morning began with reviewing recordings, and each night turned into waiting for the next threat. Anna, her assistant, noticed how much Monica had changed. "You look exhausted," Anna said quietly one evening as they closed the cafe. "Maybe you should take a day off?" Monica gave a tired smile. "I can't. If I let go of the situation, even for a day, things could spiral out of control." She knew her fear was growing stronger. Constantly on edge, she began doubting whether she could endure. But her resolve to stay and fight was unwavering. Inside, she was torn between the need to protect herself and the fear that she couldn't handle this battle alone. That evening, like every night, she checked the camera footage when something unusual caught her eye. One of the screens showed movement at the entrance. Someone was standing there hiding in the shadows. Her heart raced, her hands went cold. This wasn't a random passerby. At first, Monica didn't understand what was happening. She watched the screen, seeing the shadow start to move. The unknown figure slowly approached the window, pulled out a spray can, and began writing on the glass. The words that appeared were filled with hateful slurs. At that moment, she realized she could no longer stand by. Fear gripped her, but along with it came the realization: if she didn't take action right now, this wouldn't stop. She grabbed her phone and quickly dialed the police. This time, her voice was steady with determination. "This is Monica from the cafe on 5th Street. I have footage of someone vandalizing my cafe. Please send someone as soon as possible." The wait for the police felt like an eternity. Her heart pounded. Her mind raced with dozens of thoughts. She couldn't believe she was facing vandalism again. But this time, she had evidence. When the patrol arrived, she was ready with the footage. The officers, after seeing the recording, realized the situation was becoming serious. "We'll take care of this, ma'am," one of the officers said, looking at the screen. "Now we have solid evidence." Those words brought her a small sense of relief, but the storm inside her still raged. She knew that victory in this situation wouldn't depend solely on the police. It would also depend on her. She couldn't rely on others anymore. Her strength lay in her own readiness to defend herself and her business, to fight until the end, despite her fears. Monica returned home, feeling that her battle had reached a new level. She now understood that her strength wasn't only in her resilience and determination, but also in her ability to protect herself. This experience gave her a new sense of clarity. She was no longer just a victim. She was the defender of her business, her dream, and her life. Monica sat by the window of her cafe watching the street outside. Over the past few weeks, life around her business had slowly begun to change. What once seemed impossible, seeing people walk into her cafe not just for food, but to support her struggle, was now becoming a reality. This time, visitors no longer entered with hostility or suspicion. They sat at tables, chatted, and sometimes even thanked Monica for her resilience. She could hardly believe that these changes were real. The town that once refused to accept her was now, albeit slowly, beginning to change. However, a lingering anxiety still lived within her. She feared that these changes might be temporary, that one new threat or attack could bring everything crashing down. Her mind was full of doubts, but her heart told her to believe in the progress. "Monica, it looks like we have new customers," said Anna, her assistant, pointing to a group of people approaching the entrance. Monica glanced at the door and saw a young couple, smiling as they entered the cafe. These were new customers. They had never visited her establishment before, but something in their behavior had changed. They walked up to the counter, ordered coffee, and sat at a window table. "It seems the world is starting to accept us," Monica thought, feeling warmth fill her soul. She knew that every new customer was a small victory, a tiny step toward greater reconciliation. But there was still a long road ahead. That evening, as the cafe grew quieter, the door suddenly opened, and a man walked in, someone Monica recognized. It was Mr. Harris, one of the town's influential figures, a man who had been against her from the start. He had organized the boycotts and incited others to act hostile toward her business. His appearance shocked not only Monica, but also Anna, who stood silently watching from behind the counter. Monica tensed, expecting more attacks. Inside her, a wave of anger and fear rose, but she kept her emotions in check, deciding not to show how she felt. She knew she needed to stay strong, no matter what happened. Harris, his face expressionless, walked up to the counter. Monica met his gaze, waiting for him to speak. What he said next was unexpected. "Miss Monica," he began, his voice slow and heavy, "I came to apologize." The words were so unexpected that Monica couldn't believe her ears for a moment. She froze, unsure how to respond. Inside her, conflicting emotions battled: distrust, anger, and surprise. "For what are you apologizing?" she finally managed, trying to keep her voice steady. Harris lowered his eyes to the floor, his voice softer now. "For how I treated you. I realize now that I was wrong. It wasn't right. I had no right to act that way. You've done more for this town than many of us." Monica couldn't believe what she was hearing. Standing before her was the man who had been the embodiment of all the negativity she had faced in recent months, and now he was apologizing. It brought her a sense of relief, but also an internal struggle. Should she forgive him, or at least try to? "Thank you for your words," Monica replied, her voice trembling slightly. "It means a lot to me." Harris nodded, and, without saying anything more, turned and left the cafe. Anna walked over to Monica and quietly asked, "Do you believe him?" Monica took a deep breath and shook her head. "I don't know. But if it's true, then it's more than just an apology. It means we're starting to win." The next morning, news of Mr. Harris's visit spread quickly through town. People began talking about his unexpected apology, sparking debates. Some claimed he had done the right thing, while others believed it was just an attempt to ease tensions and avoid further consequences. Monica, however, understood that this was more than a personal apology. It was a sign that her fight was beginning to bear fruit. Her resilience, her patience, and her determination were starting to change not only individuals but the town as a whole. While not everyone was ready for change, even small steps like these meant a lot. Sitting in her cafe, Monica watched people come and go, and a realization began to take root in her mind. Her patience and perseverance had led to people who once stood against her beginning to change their views. These small victories were more important than she had imagined. They gave her faith that change was possible, and that she could build her future in this town, despite all the obstacles. "You beat him, Monica," Anna said, sitting down at the table across from her. "Even if it's just one person, it's still a victory." Monica smiled, feeling warmth fill her heart. "I don't think it's a victory," she replied quietly. "It's just the beginning. But I know now that when even people like him start to recognize their mistakes, we have a chance to change this town." Monica stood by the window of her cafe, watching life unfold on the street outside. Over the past few weeks, her life had taken a new turn. Since her story spread throughout the town, she had become the subject of attention not just from locals, but from people in other cities as well. It had started with small articles in local newspapers, but now, even national journalists were noticing her. The buzz about her fight against discrimination and her resilience was drawing attention far beyond the borders of this small town. Her cafe was now bustling from morning until evening, and Monica saw more and more new faces among her customers. But with this newfound attention came a realization. She knew she was no longer seen as just a business owner, but as a symbol of change. People came not only for coffee, but to see the Monica, whose name had made headlines. This brought her no peace. On the contrary, she felt the weight of responsibility growing on her shoulders. Thoughts raced through her mind about how her story could help others facing similar injustices. But she also realized her victory was far from complete. Each new day brought new challenges, and even those who now came with smiles weren't always sincere. Hostility remained, though hidden behind polite faces. When her assistant, Anna, entered, she sat down across from Monica and said softly, "Have you heard? Journalists from national television are coming today. They want to interview you." Monica nodded, feeling a wave of anxiety rise within her. "Yes, they called. I'm not sure I'm ready for this kind of attention," she replied, her voice slightly trembling. Anna looked at her with sympathy. "You've already proven your strength. This is just another chance to show that you're not backing down." When the TV crew arrived at the cafe, Monica felt her nerves tighten. She knew her words would be heard across the country. It was more than just a chance to tell her story. It was an opportunity to inspire others in their fight against injustice. But with that came pressure. She couldn't afford to make a mistake, knowing every word she spoke would be scrutinized and discussed. The interview took place inside the cafe. The journalists set up their cameras, and a small group of customers stayed to watch Monica share her story. The host began with a simple question. "Monica, you've become a symbol of the fight against racism in your town. How do you feel about your role in these changes?" Monica took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. She knew her answer needed to be honest and heartfelt. "I never intended to become a symbol of anything," she began. "My goal was just to open a cafe and create a cozy place for people. But when I faced hatred and discrimination, I realized I couldn't just stand by. My cafe became a battleground for equality, and every day I fought not only for my right to do business, but for the rights of all who face injustice." Her words were firm, but inside, Monica still felt uncertainty. She knew this fight wasn't over and that many more obstacles lay ahead. But in the eyes of those gathered, she saw no judgment, only support. That gave her strength. "What do you think can change the situation?" the host asked. Monica paused for a moment, then replied, "We need to talk more about racism. People need to understand that it's not just someone else's problem, but something we face every day, and each of us has to fight against it." The interview aired a few days later, and thousands of people across the country saw it. Monica received dozens of letters and messages from people inspired by her story. Some shared their own experiences with racism and discrimination, while others simply expressed their support. But the most meaningful moment for her was the realization that her cafe had become more than just a place for the locals. It had become a gathering spot for people of different backgrounds who came together to discuss important issues, support one another, and simply enjoy each other's company. One evening, as the cafe was closing, Monica sat at the counter, lost in thought. Her assistant Anna approached and quietly said, "We had a lot of new faces today. It seems your cafe has become more than just a place for coffee. It's now a place where people can find support." Monica looked at Anna, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this alone," she replied, smiling. "Every day I see people changing. This is more than I ever imagined." She realized her struggle had gone beyond a personal conflict. Now her story was inspiring many, and her cafe had become a symbol not only of a fight but of hope. Monica knew there was still much work to be done, but she was ready to continue on this path. "We did this together," Monica said, looking out at the dark street. "And this is just the beginning." Monica stood by the window of her cafe, feeling a cold sense of dread wrapping around her heart. Over the past few weeks, her story had gained national attention, and her cafe had become a symbol of resilience and the fight for equality. Yet, despite these successes, she knew not everyone in town supported her or welcomed these changes. There was a tension in the air, like a silent storm brewing at her doorstep. The town seemed split into two camps, those who stood with her and those who refused to accept the shifting tides. She knew today wouldn't be easy. Several members of a local radical group had openly declared that they would protest outside her cafe. Just yesterday, one of her regular customers had warned her, "They're planning a demonstration in front of your place, calling for a boycott and demanding you close down." Monica's heart had clenched at those words. She had faced threats and hatred before, but this time, it felt real, tangible. Looking at the door of the cafe, Monica felt an internal battle brewing. Fear and doubt surged within her. She wondered, what if I can't handle this? But at the same time, a spark of determination ignited. She couldn't let these people destroy everything she had built. Anna entered and, noticing Monica's expression, cautiously asked, "Are you ready?" "They've already started gathering outside." Monica looked at her, her gaze steady, though inside, a storm raged. "I have to be ready, Anna. We can't let them intimidate us." When Monica stepped outside, she saw the group gathered at the entrance to her cafe. They held signs with slogans like, "Stop destroying our town," "Get out," and "We don't need people like you." Their eyes burned with hatred. The protest grew louder by the minute as more people joined in. Their chants echoed in her soul, reigniting all the fears she had been fighting over the past months. "They just want to break you," Anna whispered, standing by her side. But Monica couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. She knew that if she gave in to fear now, she would lose everything she had fought for. She took a step forward, her heart pounding harder with each move, as if she were walking against a fierce current. The protesters noticed her and began hurling insults directly at her. Monica felt her breath quicken, her hands trembling, but she summoned all her strength and stepped closer. One of the group's leaders, a tall man with a sharp, hostile look, stepped forward, glaring at her. "Don't you get it? We don't want people like you here," he shouted. "You're disrupting our way of life. Leave before it gets worse." In that moment, something inside Monica shifted. Her fear was replaced by anger and resolve. She could no longer remain silent. "I'm not leaving," she said loudly, her voice steady and confident despite the tremor within. "I haven't destroyed your town. I've created a place where people can feel safe. I'm not going anywhere just because you don't like my skin color or what I stand for." The crowd froze for a moment. Her words seemed to give them pause, but only briefly. The protest continued, and Monica realized this confrontation wouldn't end quickly. But she couldn't retreat now. After her words, Monica stood facing the crowd, locking eyes with the protesters. Inside, she felt a storm of emotions: fear, anger, and the realization that this was a turning point in her fight. People shouted, trying to intimidate her, but something in their eyes had changed. They saw that she wasn't backing down, and it frustrated them. Yet, with their frustration came something else: uncertainty. The man leading the group stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can change everything here? We don't need your ideas. We were fine before you came." Monica took a deep breath and replied, meeting his gaze directly. "You were fine because you didn't see the people your piece was oppressing. I haven't disrupted your order. I've given others the chance to feel equal. If that scares you, then the problem isn't with me." Her voice was so firm that the crowd fell silent for a moment. They hadn't expected such a response. She wasn't making excuses or defending herself. She was asserting her right to exist and to fight for equality. Slowly, the protesters began to drift away, one by one. Left alone with the group's leader, Monica continued to hold his gaze, her resolve unwavering. "I'm not afraid of you," she said quietly, but loud enough for him to hear. "I'm not afraid because I know my fight is just, and I will keep fighting no matter how many times you try to stop me." The man stared at her for a few more seconds, then turned and walked away without another word. The crowd followed him, leaving Monica standing alone in front of her cafe. She didn't feel like she had won, but there was a growing sense inside her that her resilience was starting to bear fruit. As she stood there, the quiet of the evening settled around her. Monica realized that she had faced down her fear and stood her ground, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced or oppressed. The fight wasn't over, but she had proven something important today, that she wouldn't be broken. Monica stood by the window of her cafe, reflecting on the journey she had taken. A few months ago, her struggle had started alone, when she first faced discrimination and aggression from the townspeople. Now, the cafe that had been her dream had become a symbol of change. She felt that her efforts were starting to bear fruit. Her cafe was now visited not only by locals, but by people from other cities, drawn by her story, which had spread through national media. Every morning, as she looked at the growing number of customers, she felt pride. But with it, a deep sense of responsibility. She understood that her cafe had become more than just a business. It was a place that symbolized justice and equality. It was a space where people could now openly discuss topics that had once been hushed up. She saw customers of different backgrounds sitting together, engaged in lively conversations, sharing their experiences. Yet, alongside this sense of achievement, Monica still harbored fear. What if all of this was temporary? What if new obstacles awaited her at every turn? She knew that many residents were still hostile, despite the progress. And yet, despite this internal conflict, she couldn't deny that her small cafe had grown into something much larger. Anna, her loyal assistant, approached and softly said, "Monica, the activists are arriving today. They want to meet with you and discuss plans for upcoming events." Monica nodded, her face relaxing slightly. She knew that the support of these people meant the possibility of doing even more. But with each new step, her anxiety grew stronger. Her dream was now becoming a public endeavor, and she could no longer ignore her role in the larger movement. When the activists arrived, the cafe was filled with fresh energy. These were people known across the country for their fight against racism and discrimination. They brought with them experience and knowledge they wanted to share. Monica sat at one of the tables with the group, listening as they discussed future events, lectures, and open discussions they could hold at her cafe. "Your place has become a symbol, Monica," said one of the activists, a middle-aged man named Robert. "It's more than just a cafe. It's a cultural center where people can meet, discuss societal problems, and work toward solutions." Monica looked at him thoughtfully, absorbing his words. It was hard for her to believe that her small establishment had turned into something so significant. She had always dreamed of creating a safe place, but she had never imagined it would become a haven not only for her, but for everyone who had experienced injustice. "I just wanted to open a cafe," she replied, smiling slightly. "But it seems I opened the door to an entire movement." Robert nodded, his eyes filled with respect. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with something small. The key is not to stop." Monica realized that her journey was far from over. Each new step brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. The activists suggested holding a series of lectures and discussions right in the cafe. The place that had once been a source of tension and conflict was now set to become a hub for conversations about justice and equality. A few weeks after the activists' visit, Monica's cafe had transformed into a true cultural center for the town. Lectures, meetings, and discussions became regular events. People came not just for coffee, but for support, for the chance to voice their opinions and discuss difficult but important topics. In a town where racism and discrimination had long been left unaddressed, everything was now changing. Monica watched as her dream of a safe space where everyone felt equal was finally becoming a reality. One evening, after the last lecture had ended and the crowd had dispersed, Monica remained in the cafe alone. She sat at a table, lost in thought, looking at the walls that had once been defaced with hateful graffiti, but were now adorned with paintings and photographs, reflecting the journey they had all taken. This place had become more than she had ever imagined. Anna approached her, smiling softly. "Do you see this, Monica? This is your dream." Monica looked at her, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Yes," she replied quietly. But it's more than just my dream. This place now belongs to everyone who's willing to fight for justice. Anna sat down across from her and took her hand. You've created more than a cafe. You've created a community where everyone has a voice. Monica knew her path had been far from easy, but every step, every struggle, every moment of pain had led her to this moment. She no longer doubted that justice was possible if one wasn't afraid to keep fighting. Her cafe had become the safe place she had always dreamed of, but she also realized that her fight wasn't over. It was only the beginning of a new chapter. Monica stood in front of the building that had become the embodiment of her most cherished dream, a cafe of her own in a small town. She had carefully chosen the location, hoping her little corner would become a cozy refuge for the locals. But now, gazing at the bright sign and the closed doors, a growing sense of anxiety gnawed at her. The previous evening had been tense. After weeks of meticulous preparation, cleaning, and meeting with suppliers, she finally saw the result of her hard work. Yet, alongside her pride, a deep unease had settled in. Monica took a deep breath, feeling the cold morning air which seemed to seep into her skin, reflecting the town's chilly attitude. She had already been subtly reminded several times that people like her didn't belong in their community. The words were harsh and cut deep, but she decided not to dwell on them. She knew it was just prejudice. However, the memory of scornful glances at the supermarket or the disapproving faces of neighbors haunted her. I didn't come all this way to give up, she whispered to herself, as if convincing her own heart. Monica had always dreamed of owning her own cafe. Even as a teenager, working part-time in small diners, she understood how important it was for people to have a place where they could feel warm and at ease. But the town was filled with injustice, and she often felt she had to work twice as hard as her white colleagues to earn recognition. Her mind flashed back to last night's headlines in the local news, which fueled the town's negativity. A new cafe with a questionable future? What awaits us? Every line carried an unspoken yet palpable mockery of her ambitions. These articles painted the picture of a woman who didn't belong, supposedly disrupting the town's way of life. Monica clenched her fists, her heart pounding with anger. Was her business really the subject of such scrutiny just because she was black? Her cafe was no different from any other. She had envisioned the joy people would feel as they enjoyed fresh coffee, homemade pastries, and the warmth she intended to offer each customer. But that dream was overshadowed by her fear of the town's rejection. The cafe's opening day became not just a test of her professional skills, but a trial of her resilience. People walked in, looked around, and left in open irritation. Some stayed and politely ordered, only to complain openly about the food or service, making it clear that this wasn't the place for them. Monica tried to smile at every guest, hiding her disappointment behind that smile. They're just not used to it yet, she reassured herself, reminding herself that change takes time. But her calm didn't last. By noon, a group of customers sat at a table, brazenly discussing her presence in the cafe. I wonder how long she'll last, sneered a man in a business suit, glancing at her with disdain. Oh, come on. They'll be closed in a couple of weeks. A woman in a luxurious fur coat chimed in, her voice dripping with mockery. Their words hit her like blows. Monica felt anger boiling inside her. These people didn't even try to hide their hatred. She knew she didn't deserve this treatment, but standing up to such hostility wasn't easy. Perhaps you have some suggestions on how we can improve our service? She tried to ask politely, hoping to diffuse their aggression. You should just go back to where you came from, the man replied with a smirk. We were doing just fine without you. His words cut like a knife. Monica felt her hands tremble with anger, but she took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was here to fight for her dream, not to give in to provocations. Thank you for your feedback, she said with a strained smile, and walked away before she lost her composure. Her mind swirled with countless thoughts. Why was every step toward success met with such open resistance? Why did the color of her skin make her an unwelcome guest in this town? She wasn't an outsider. She was an entrepreneur just like anyone else. But her success seemed to challenge their world. Several months had passed since Monica's legal battle ended in her favor. Now, her cafe had become a true symbol of resistance to racism, not just in her town, but far beyond. Every day, Monica welcomed people who traveled from other regions to see her cafe and support her cause. She still found it hard to believe that her personal fight against discrimination had grown to such a scale. However, inside, she still felt a lingering fear. The fear that the attention and support she had received might fade as quickly as they had arrived. But with each new day, as she saw the smiling faces of visitors, heard their words of gratitude and appreciation, her confidence grew. Her small cafe had become more than just a business. It was a place where people could talk about their struggles, share their stories, and find support in the fight for equality. One morning, as the cafe had just opened, Monica sat at her desk, reflecting on the journey she had been through. Her thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It was the organizer of a national human rights conference. "Hello, Monica," came a confident voice on the other end of the line. "We would like to invite you to speak at our conference as an honorary guest. Your story has inspired so many, and we would love for you to share it with other entrepreneurs and activists." Monica froze, her heart racing with excitement. This was recognition of her work on a national level. She felt pride, but with it a wave of anxiety. Would she be able to convey her story effectively? Would she have the strength to share everything she had been through? Of course, thank you," Monica replied, trying to contain the emotions flooding through her. "It's an honor." After ending the call, she placed the phone on the table and sat in thought. She knew this was a significant moment, not only for her but for everyone fighting for equality and justice. Preparing for the conference took several weeks. Monica worked hard to express in her speech the depth of her experience, every struggle and every victory. Her internal conflict was intense: how to speak about the pain and hardships without losing hope, how to inspire others while not hiding the bitterness she had felt on her journey. Each night before the event, she read through her notes, trying different versions of her speech until she found the words that truly expressed her feelings. This wasn't just the story of opening a cafe. It was a story of resilience, of fighting against racism and oppression, of how one person could make a big difference by refusing to give up. Anna, her closest assistant, often dropped by her office to offer support. "I saw your draft," Anna said one evening. "It's incredibly moving. You need to be sure that what you say reaches not just those who are fighting, but those who doubt their own strength." Monica smiled, hearing those words. She realized her story wasn't just about her. She was speaking on behalf of those who had faced injustice, who had felt fear and doubt. Now her task was to give those people a voice, to support those who couldn't yet speak out about their struggles. Internally, Monica still felt fear, but she understood that this speech was an important step. She was no longer just a cafe owner. She had become a symbol of change, and her words could impact the lives of many. The day of the conference arrived. Monica stood backstage, feeling her entire body trembling with nerves. She knew her speech would be a pivotal moment for everyone in the audience. The crowd wasn't just made up of entrepreneurs, but also activists, journalists, and government officials. In the audience were people who had heard her story and were expecting inspiration. When her name was announced, Monica took a deep breath and stepped forward. The stage lights blinded her for a moment, but then she saw the faces of people looking at her with hope and attention. This gave her confidence. She began to speak. "When I started my journey, I never imagined I would be standing here before you," she began. "My goal was to open a small cafe where people could feel comfortable, but it turned out I was building more than just a business. I was creating a place where the fight for equality became possible." Monica told her story, from the early days of the cafe through the attacks, boycotts, and threats, to the moment she realized she was not only fighting for her business, but for her right to exist. Her voice shook as she recalled the most difficult moments, but it was also filled with strength and conviction. "Each of us has a right to equality," she said. "But equality doesn't come easily. We have to fight for it. And even when you feel like you're alone in that fight, remember, behind you are all the people who have walked that path before you." When her speech ended, the audience erupted into applause. People stood, expressing their admiration and support. Monica stood on stage, tears welling up in her eyes. She knew her words had resonated with people. That moment was the culmination of her struggle. She now understood that her story could inspire others, that her efforts would help those just beginning their fight for justice.